Okay. All right, I got to be honest. This surprised me when I saw it. I came across a list of teams that have won the most amount of games in the last decade. So the college football playoff era is what we're looking at here. But teams that have won the most amount of games, but have not made the college football playoffs. So, not your Clemson's, Georgia's, Ohio State's, Bama's, Oklahoma's, whatever else. Anybody that's made the playoffs is excluded from this list, regardless of how many games they've won. But who's won the most amount of games in the last 10 years, but has not made the playoffs even one time? And tell me down below who you think it is. Before you look it up, before you Google it, before you watch the rest of this video when I tell you and show you who it is, let me know down below right now. Who do you think has won the most amount of games over the last 10 years, but has yet to make the college football playoff? My guess would have been Penn State. They win about 10 games a year. They've got a few that are worse than that, but generally, anyway, that would have been my pick, was Penn State. And they're on the list, but they're not number one. Another disclaimer, I'm talking about the Power Five. When I pull this list up, you're going to see Group of Five teams on here. When I first saw the headline of this article, teams that have won the most games in the last 10 years without making a college football playoff, my mind didn't even think about Group of Five. So I guessed Penn State. Some of these Group of Five teams might be pretty obvious to you too, if that's what you're thinking. But I'm more curious about the Power Five teams and the Power Five programs that have won the most amount of games without making a playoff. So let me know down below who you think it was. And I'm going to show you the list here. And we're going to start with the team that has won the most amount of games in the last 10 years, and it is a Group of Five team, App State. Now, again, I didn't even consider the Group of Five when I was trying to think who the team would be before I read this article. But App State has won 95 games in the last 10 years. You don't have to be a math major to figure this out. That's an average of 9.5 wins a year. It's not slowing down. They won 9 games in 23. They became an FBS program in 2014. Now, that's pretty impressive. They were FCS prior to that. So they have been consistently good for the entire duration that they've been an FBS program. Again, there's 134 FBS programs now. They joined at the FBS in 2014. They've averaged 9.5 wins. They've had 5 10-plus win seasons. The closest they came to the playoffs was 2019. You see it there. But anyway, I want to primarily focus on the Power Five. But number 2 is a Group of Five team as well. Boise State, 94 wins, so almost as many as App State. Closest they came to making the college football playoff, 2014. 2019 team was actually closer. It was 12-1 with the only loss coming to 28-25 to BYU, but the 2014 version holds the more interesting distinction. It would have made the college football playoff if it was in the 2024 expansion force. So they would have made a 12-team playoff if we had that in 2014. But anyway, so those are the top 2. They're Group of Five. The next one is a Power Five team. So this next team is going to be the Power Five team, Power Five program that has won the most amount of games in the last 10 years, but has never made the college football playoff. Again, my guess would have been Penn State. I would have been wrong. I'm curious who your guess would have been. Let me know down below. But here we go. It is Wisconsin. I think the reason this surprised me is because of recency bias. They've not been great the last few years. I remember a lot of times on this channel talking about Wisconsin being the best program not to make a college football playoff. So I'm kind of surprised that I didn't think Wisconsin. It never even crossed my mind, honestly. I went straight to Penn State. I tried to think who else it could be. Wisconsin didn't even dawn on me, and I'm a little surprised. They have been a really good team over the last really 20 to 25 years. They've been a consistently good team. They haven't had very many great years, but they haven't had very many bottom-out years either. I mean, for a long time there, they were winning 10-plus games a year. And just, being in the Big Ten West, they were having a hard time getting over the Big Ten or the Big Ten East hump, winning that conference championship game, beating an Ohio State or a Michigan or wherever it was. But they've won 90 games over the last 10 years. That's an average of 9 a year. And that average was higher until the last couple of years when they've not nosedived, but 7, 8 wins a season for Wisconsin is not what they're used to doing, and that's drug them down a little bit. But they're still the Power Five team that has won the most amount of games in the last 10 years without ever having made the playoffs. And it even says it here. You'd think Wisconsin would be lower after the last few seasons, but it remains the best college football program to not make the playoffs. 2 other schools have more wins, but they're Group of Five. Well, I talked about that myself. The closest Wisconsin came to making the college football playoff was 2017. It was one drive away. The 12-0 Badgers were down 27-21 in the Big Ten championship game against Ohio State, and they had the ball. They get a touchdown and pull it off. They're in the college football playoff as an unbeaten Big Ten champ, and Alabama would have got left out, which is interesting because Alabama went on to win it all that year, beating Georgia in Georgia's first trip to the college football playoff national championship game. But it would have been Oklahoma versus Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl instead of Georgia versus. So that would have changed a lot had Wisconsin found a way to win this game here, the 2017 Big Ten championship game. But of course they didn't. They missed out on the playoffs, and that's the closest they came. But they've got the most number of wins at 90 without ever having made the college football playoff. Oklahoma State. Now, how many people would have guessed this? I could see some people maybe picking Penn State. I could see some people getting it right with Wisconsin. I don't know how many people had Oklahoma State though on their bingo card for best teams not to make a college football playoff. But here they are, 89 wins over the last decade, 89 wins during the college football playoff era. Mike Gundy's created an underappreciated powerhouse in Stillwater since 2014. His Cowboys have stacked up win-wise with several college football playoff programs. They had as many wins as Michigan. Think about that. Oklahoma State and Michigan won the same number of games during the college football playoff era. That's crazy. They won 10 games in 2023, and it was their 8th double-digit win season since 2009. So Gundy out at Oklahoma State, a pretty consistently good program there. Again, similar to Wisconsin, they've had a hard time getting over the hump of the top program or two within that conference. And for Oklahoma State, that's been Oklahoma a lot of years, Texas, whatever the case. But there you go. Oklahoma for the second in terms of Power 5 teams with 89 wins. Moving on from there, Iowa. I guess we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, they win 9-10 games. A lot of times they got no offense, really good defense, especially lately, but a consistently good team here, Iowa. They've won 88 games during the college football playoff era, but of course have never made the playoff. They only have 2 losing seasons since 2000. Closest they came was 2015. One stop. It was a goal line stop in a Big Ten championship game against Michigan State, away from getting the honor of being throttled by Alabama in the college football playoff. That was the year Michigan State beat Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. Michigan State got put in the playoffs and they lost 38-0, I believe was the score. I know they got shut out. I think it was 38-0 they lost to Alabama in that playoff game. Could have been you, Iowa. Could have been you getting humiliated in that game. But 88 wins for Iowa during the college football playoff era. And here's Penn State tied with Iowa at 88. Again, this is who I thought of in my head when I saw the headline of this article, which team has won the most games in the college football playoff era without having made the playoffs. My mind went to Penn State. James Franklin, of course, is the head coach there. The closest they came to making the college football playoff was 2016. That's the only year they've won the Big Ten. The 2017 and 2019 teams were strong, but 2016 is where it was their best team. Penn State lost 2 games, but beat Ohio State 24-21. The 1-loss Buckeyes got into the college football playoff. The 2-loss Big Ten champion did not. Penn State won the Big Ten in 2016 and even beat Ohio State during the regular season, but did not get into the playoffs because they had the 2 losses. A 2-loss team never made the college football playoff, at least not under the 4-team format. But there you go, Penn State. Tied for 5th or third in the Power 5 most wins in the college football playoff era without making the playoffs. Memphis, another group of 5 team. Utah at 86. This is another one that probably shouldn't surprise anybody. They win a lot of games. Now, they've never made the playoffs, but they've won multiple Pac-12 titles. One of the most consistently good programs in the country, a head coach and coaching staff, both coordinators who have been there forever. A really, really good program. They were a Mountain West team until 2010. And then, of course, they joined the Pac-12, which is now gone, and they're in the Big 12. But the closest Utah came to the college football playoff, 2019. It was within 1 win, maybe. At least it would have had a great argument after going 11-1 with an acceptable early loss at Southern Cal. All it had to do was beat Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game, but they got whacked, and that was it. Win, and it could have been in to face either Oklahoma or Notre Dame. Didn't work out, but that was the closest they came. And they've been kind of close a couple of other times. They, like I said, they won the Pac-12 actually 2 of the last 3 years, but in both of those years they had 2 losses, which sort of kept them out there. But Utah with 86 wins during the college football playoff era. San Diego State, another group of 5 team here. Toledo, group of 5. Air Force, group of 5. Marshall, group of 5. Central Florida, recently a part of the Power 5, but the majority of the college football playoff era, UCF was a group of 5 member, but they won 80 games. And of course, famously, their 2017 season where they went undefeated, won the conference championship at 13-0, and went on to beat Auburn in a New Year's Six game to finish 14-0. But they did get left out of the playoffs. Western Kentucky, group of 5. Southern Cal. This one surprises me. I'll be honest. I'm surprised Southern Cal's this high on the list. They had a really good year. What was it, 2 years ago? Lincoln Riley's first year. Caleb Williams won the Heisman. They made the Pac-12 title game before getting beat by the Utah team we talked about earlier. But, this past year was not very good at 4 or 5 losses. And without looking up Southern Cal's record, it seems like they've basically lost 4 or 5 games a year for the last decade. It's kind of just what it feels like when you think about Southern Cal. But they're 15th on this list with 79 wins. And, of course, the closest, like we just mentioned, was 2022. Had they beat Utah in that Pac-12 title game in 2022, they would have gotten into the playoffs, probably instead of TCU, possibly instead of Ohio State. But either Ohio State or TCU would have got left out, and Southern Cal would have been in. But they didn't win that game. They lost to Utah for the second time that season, and that kept them out. BYU was 78. They're just now joining the Power 5 as of last year, or at least a conference. Some people considered them a power team even before they joined the Big 12, but they had 78 wins. Closest they came was 2020. Their only loss was in a wild thriller at Coastal Carolina, but you got to remember that was the COVID year, and BYU in particular played a strange schedule because they weren't in a conference, so they didn't have a conference lineup to play during COVID like all the other conferences did. But one-loss team in 2020, BYU, but 78 wins for them during the college football playoff era. How about NC State? NC State has the most wins of any team in the ACC that has not made the playoffs. So they've got more wins in the last 10 years than everybody in the ACC except, Clemson, I guess? Florida State made a playoffs, though, back in 2014, so they're not going to be on this list. But Florida State's probably close to this win total at 78. I mean, they had some bad years. Think about Willie Taggart. But anyway, NC State, 78 wins. Of course, Dave Duran been there a long time. Closest NC State came to the college football playoff, 2021. But really, they weren't even that close. They were knocked out of every college football playoff chase before November. But in 2021, they lost early to Mississippi State 24-10 before dropping 2 ACC games by a total of 4 points. So that was probably their best team during the college football playoff era, that 2021 team, but really they weren't even that close to getting into the playoffs with 3 losses. But there you go. NC State, 78 wins. Louisiana, 77. That's where Billy Napier came from there. So a lot of these wins belong to Billy Napier. Of course, Power 5, he can't win shit. I can't beat Kentucky or Vandy. It's a shame. How about Texas A&M with 77? That surprises me because what's the joke about Texas A&M? Hell, people don't even call them Texas A&M. What do they call them? Texas 8-4? Apparently 8-4 is good enough to get you on this list because that's usually what that's been their record more times than not during the college football playoff era. They had a year or two that was a little better than that. Their COVID year was also the closest they came, 9-1 that year. This, according to the good people at College Football News, says they probably should have been in over Notre Dame. But 77 wins for the Aggies during the college football playoff era, most of that under Jimbo Fisher. Houston at 76 wins, now a Power 5 team, but spent the majority of the college football playoff era as a Group of 5 team. Florida was 76, 3 straight losing seasons and 5 of the last 11. Wow. What sounds worse? 3 straight losing seasons or 5 losing seasons in the last 11 years? Both are really bad and embarrassing, honestly. Shout out Sunbelt Billy. But there you go, 76 wins for Florida during the college football playoff era. The COVID year was the closest they came to. Dan Mullen's best year in Gainesville. They lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game, right? Yeah, the SEC championship game. Kansas State at 76. Kind of a Big 12 version of Utah, not quite as good. Hasn't won as many conference titles, but Kansas State, a consistently good program. Rarely do they have a great year. We'll see what they do this year. I like Kansas State this year, by the way. If that quarterback ends up being as good as he looked in the bowl game last year, I think Kansas State could be really good. And they got Dylan Edwards, Colorado's only good offensive player. out of the transfer portal. But anyway, Kansas State 76 wins. Troy 76 wins. There you go. So who'd you think it was? Before we went over that list, who'd you think it was that was going to be the team with the most wins during the college football playoff era that had not made the college football playoffs? I admitted I was wrong. I would have guessed Penn State. Who would you have guessed? Let me know down below. Appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.